Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Part of the System. Today I'm with Pierre Comis, Head of Schools and Participation for Special Olympics Australia. They support students with intellectual disability and autism. Pierre's been in the role, I think, for about 7 months, but in the industry for around 20 years, working across peak bodies such as AFL and Rugby League. But most notably, Pierre was with Sports Australia for about 12 years in a number of roles, but was instrumental in developing the physical literacy framework for Australia. And then after that, he was snapped up by Special Olympics Australia, and most recently, I think, has also become a board member of Blue Earth Foundation, and they look to change kids' lives through movement and mindfulness. Now, just because you've got a little bit more time on your hands, Pierre, you're also a casual lecturer and a private tutor in maths and English. So I'm not so sure if you do adult lessons, but I could certainly do with a bit of a hand there. I actually failed maths twice at school. But I'm really excited to have Pierre on today so we can delve into disability with a physical literacy focus. So welcome, Pierre. How are you going?
Yeah, I'm well. Thanks, David. I'm excited for this conversation, actually. It's the first style of conversation like this in my new role. As you said, it's been the better part of 7 months now with Special Olympics.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I finished up with Sport Australia at the end of last year after 12 years and thought I'd have all this time on my hands. And it's amazing how I've almost managed to become busier now than I was back then. So, but thoroughly enjoying it, really just enjoying everything about the work that I'm doing and the organisations I'm connected to at the moment. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for your time today. And you showed me up a bit. You look very smart there, and I'm a little polo shirt. So.
Oh, look, I've got a few meetings on today, and it starts today. So it starts now. I thought I'll throw a shirt on and look the part.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, we'll delve straight in. So, in terms of well-being, what does that mean to you, Pierre?
Oh, look, well-being, I think it's a really broad term, and it can be interpreted in so many ways, and rightly so. Everything from someone's physical health to their mental health, their emotional, social health, social connections. For me, I just think of it as being the best version of oneself that you can be, the healthiest and best version. So, you know, for me personally, I try and keep active every day. I try and clear my mind at the end of every day. I try and separate work and the stress of work with coming home and being a dad and a husband, and really just making time to do a bit of reflection as often as I can on where life is taking me, what's happening around me, and how I want to engage with the world, and whether I'm doing that, sort of checking myself against my own goals and aspirations on a regular basis. So I actually find that the physical activity, I generally do about an hour most days, if I can fit it in. And I find that's the time for me at the moment. It's individual based. I generally go to the gym or go for a run, and I use that time to do a lot of my thinking and reflecting and just pondering all sorts of things, which clears my mind and just allows me to hit the day on the front foot once I've had a bit of a workout.
Yeah, cool. So if we're talking about the different components of and strategies in terms of what you do, so you've got physical activity in there, you do some reflection, some time out, obviously the connection there with your family.
Yep.
You know, you've got all these different hats that you've got on. Is there anything else that you do to look after your well-being?
Oh, look, you know, it's the things like trying to eat well and the other, I suppose, if there's a rule that I've always had in my life, and I apply this one in my professional life, but it stemmed from my personal life, is that I like to surround myself with good people, people that have a positive outlook, people that have a really strong resilience for handling change and being able to provide advice and be able to sort of listen and provide a shoulder to lean on from time to time. So I have a really strong personal and professional network around me that I engage quite regularly. You know, I've had personal and professional challenges over the years, as everybody does. And I've found that I can be at my best when I can lean on others and sort of utilize the support that they provide. So having a strong social connection or a social circle, I found particularly important. Family is one thing, you know. I've got 3 young kids and they keep me active. It almost feels like you never switch off and all the parents out there will know exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's important to have the people that you can go and just have a coffee, or go for a bit of a walk, or just do something together and chew the fat from time to time. I find that's really helpful for me as well.
Yeah, but I love that, how you try and surround yourself with positive, optimistic people, and they can try and lift you up and support you, when's needed, and vice versa. I think
Definitely.
it's
Definitely.
important you help each other. Okay, thanks for that. So, in terms of your new role at Special Olympics, can you just give us a little bit of an overview of where they sit in the system, in terms of the health and wellness system?
Yeah, look, so Special Olympics Australia are part of a global movement, and here in Australia have been in existence since 1976, and essentially we are one of 9 national sporting organisations for people with a disability in Australia. We are one of the larger organisations in terms of the athlete base that we represent. We have pathways for children and adults to take part in weekly training and competition through a network of 46 active clubs around the country. From there, they have inter-club events. There's pathways through to state and national games, as well as junior national games. And of course, being the international movement that we are, there's also the pathway into the World Games every 4 years for our athletes that have intellectual disability and autism or autism. So that's essentially who we cater for. About 3,500 members in the club system at the moment, and thousands more participating in our school and community programs. We have health programs, we have athlete leadership programs, and very much pushing the unified sport model as well now, where we actually encourage the breaking down of perceptions and barriers, and get children and people with and without intellectual disability participating in sport together. And that's really, that ethos is at the heart of our new Inclusive Sport in Schools program, which I've been brought on initially to drive and to pilot in New South Wales as part of a broader strategy to increase our reach into the school system and provide more opportunities and more exposure of our brand and our movement to children with ID, but also to schools, not just the schools for specific purposes or those with special units, but even in mainstream schools. And so one example I'll give you is that in New South Wales, which is the remit we've got at the moment for this schools program, there's 159,000 students with intellectual disability, but of those, only 85,000 are in a specialist school or a special unit. The other 74,000 are in a normal classroom in a mainstream school, often with very little additional support. And so those teachers need support, which we can provide. Those students, their families need support that we can provide. And so we're creating a suite of programs and other professional learning opportunities, and looking to start rolling that out from next term, and definitely throughout the course of next year and the year after, as part of this large-scale pilot that we're now running.
That's awesome. So I'm just trying to work this out, and you're a maths tutor, so that's about 53%, I think, is in terms of students that would have ID normal in mainstream, mainstream schools. So historically, then, have we been able to cater or provide support for these students?
Look, I think the reality is everyone has the best intentions, and everyone wants to, and forgive me for being a bit blunt, but people want to make sure they tick the box of, inclusion, diversity. It's commonplace to think of that and to always have a pillar within a plan that is about the inclusion and diversity space. But from my perspective, nearly 20 years in the sector, this is my first role embedded in the disability sector. I've learned a lot, and I continue to learn. And one of the things I've learned is there is so much more that we can do and we need to do. That by far we are not doing enough. But part of that, I think, is a huge lack of education or awareness in the mainstream population about just how easy it is to be able to adequately adapt a program or an offering, or the way that we might run a game or a lesson of some sort. It's actually quite easy to make some minor adjustments. I often look at an analogy of coaching. I've come through Sport Australia in the early days, used to run community coach training programs and really bring the Playing for Life philosophy to life through coaching. And that is all about making changes based on observations of the participants in a group, and ensuring that the activities are always tailored to be developmentally appropriate, because you will have those that are very capable, those far less capable, and a good coach will structure a lesson to cater for everyone. Those principles are as true as ever when you're talking about children with intellectual disability or a disability in general. It's just about feeling confident as a coach or as a teacher that you have got an understanding of how to adapt a lesson or modify a game in a way that it becomes more realistic, or success becomes more achievable, so that progression can take place, so learning can take place. So I would argue that no, we don't do enough. No, teachers and coaches probably aren't supported enough, but those that are out there delivering are amazingly passionate, amazingly talented and dedicated to the cause, and we want to share their learnings and their best practice with everyone. And I see part of the role that I've got through this schools pilot is to make sure that the resources that are there, and the resources we'll continue to develop, are able to be shared widely, and we're able to actually support all teachers to be better at providing inclusive opportunities for those children to be active through sport, through physical activity in schools, but through physical education classes. How can we make them higher quality? How can we make them more inclusive as a byproduct of the investment we're making deliberately in schools?
Yeah. Well, it's so exciting. And I know from my own experience, teaching sports programs, people with disability, it can be very confronting in the beginning. But it's very rewarding, and enthusiasm, I think, is one of the things that sticks in my mind with coaches, which is really infectious. For anyone.
I agree with you completely. The thing that I found is the rewarding aspect. I think seeing the smiles on the faces of the children and seeing them succeed at a task or an activity is the most rewarding feeling for anyone. I mean, coaching in general provides you that feeling of euphoria, but I think seeing that, at least in my experience, seeing that within the intellectual the community of those with intellectual disability is just amazingly rewarding. The potential to have impact is so great, and that's what's really driving me in this role at the moment.
Yeah, wow. And how many schools are you looking, so with the Inclusive Sports program, how many schools are you looking to target, and over what period?
So at the moment, the funding we've got is over 2 years. So we'll commence delivery next term 4, 2020. And COVID permitting, of course, and it is a bit different by jurisdiction, but we're looking to get into a bit over 200 schools. Wow. So currently Special Olympics is active in 29 schools in New South Wales. We want to scale that up to get an additional 200 schools over the next 2 years. So it's quite a huge increase. But we have received funding from the Prime Minister's office directly, and we've got this opportunity that we really need to tackle, grab it with two hands and run with it. So we're having a good crack at it, 200 new schools. And as I said, the plan then is to look at the success in New South Wales, and we're going to run an evaluation of the program and measure the impact and use it as a springboard to then hopefully scale up our efforts in the other jurisdictions around the country as well, and ensure that the inclusive sport program and the model that we're building, the broader suite of programs, is available to all schools, and can really scale up to support those children with ID and autism to become more active, and to then hopefully connect with our Special Olympics clubs and our other providers, and ensure that they are able to feel that success and realise their potential. And for those that are interested and make that commitment, even explore the pathway into our games, our various state national games.
Yeah, wow. So this is another large-scale program, and that kind of links really nicely to my next question around leading, these big projects that you've got experience in. So, given the complexity of what you're doing now, and then if we just roll back to your previous role with Sports Australia and the physical literacy framework, where you were trying to affect a healthier population, if you will, through getting through people using the physical literacy framework. Have you got any I suppose lessons learned or systems practices, good or bad, that you could share with us?
Oh gosh, there's plenty. The last few years at Sport Australia in those senior roles, there was a lot of learning, but there was a lot of good progress made. I think initial progress that needed to be made, and most of that was really based around breaking down perceptions and sharing a vision, or developing and then sharing a vision, and bringing different sectors on the journey. So I guess for the people listening, a bit of context: I was Director of Physical Literacy Leadership, and essentially the remit was mid-2018, the Australian Sports Commission was rebranded to Sport Australia. The Sport 2030 National Plan was launched, and we went about having a crack at improving the physical activity rates of Australians, in addition to just increasing participation in traditional sport, community sport. So all of a sudden, we, the team that I led, went along the process of developing a final framework for physical literacy in this country, which is now out there, and a position statement and a suite of resources, and a website, and those resources continue to come now. There's a whole range of new ones for the school and education landscape that have been released to help implement that approach. But largely it was about creating a vision for why physical literacy, or deliberately focusing on improving the physical literacy of individuals, particularly of children and youth, was the right way and the most effective way to achieve a longer term impact of increasing physical activity. We can remove the argument that I often make, and I think I said this at the National Sports Convention last year on a panel, is that you can remove all of the barriers, the traditional barriers to participation. We talk about things like the cost of sport, and we've got voucher programs in most jurisdictions that give a subsidy around registration. We talk about transport, time poor parents, lack of facilities, all the barriers we're aware of. If we overcame all of those barriers and they weren't there, I make the argument that we still wouldn't see a huge increase in physical activity rates, or in the number of children and youth meeting the physical activity guideline of 60 minutes moderate to vigorous physical activity a day. I say that because many kids, the current generation, actually lack the fundamental movement skills. They lack the confidence. They lack the knowledge and the understanding of how, where, and why to move, and what that means. And they lack the cognitive ability to think about how to progress that. So to me, developing all of those things, which is broadly the holistic development of children, the physical literacy of children, is critical if we want to realise the benefit of all of our other efforts of improving physical activity. Now, to do that, as you can imagine, David, it's a whole of system approach. I mean, you can't go about that sort of a strategy in this country without engaging sport, health, education, transport, environment, infrastructure. You can make an argument that there's economic and productivity benefits. So you go and tap the Treasurer and the Finance Minister on the shoulder as well. It becomes a whole of government solution, has to be a whole of government solution. And so that was the biggest thing for me, was not only leading that work, but actually getting around and growing the stakeholders with which Sport Australia was speaking to and partnering with. Firstly, within the sport and active recreation sector, we went beyond national sporting organisations, started talking to Fitness Australia, to other private organisations and charities and different providers in the recreation industry. We talked extensively with education departments, both public, independent and Catholic, primary and secondary. There's a lot to do in the tertiary sector around teacher training. We talked to professional bodies such as ACHPA and those other organisations, peak bodies, if you like. And then you start to talk to health. The health department is huge, and there are so many great programs and great channels of funding that exist. But the solution really, it keeps coming down to that systems piece, where it was identifying all the cogs in the wheel and being able to say, well, this is where physical literacy sits. It's sort of at the heart of a lot of that, but here's how we need to activate it in an education setting, and here's how we activate it in community sport or in active recreation, and here's what it means if we get more people moving in terms of benefits to the environment and to active transport. And it was really trying to connect in with all of those sectors. So the way to do that was to have a clear vision and a clear message, and to go out and share that. And I always found, personally for me, flying around the country meeting with so many people, it was needing to understand what was important to the sector that you were meeting with, and being able to position physical activity, or the benefit of physical activity, underpinned by a deliberate attention to detail on physical literacy, to ensure that they saw how it would benefit them against their objectives. That was a key thing is really being able to share that quite clearly. And that is still, I mean, 2 years of doing that work, and there is still so many more years of that work to do to get everyone truly on board and aligned within the system.
I think that active listening, and a quote that I use a lot is seek first to understand before being understood. So really listening to all the organisations that are out there, because you don't need a lot of duplication, a lot of good stuff happening. So sounds like there was a lot of consultation. And how long did that go on for before you even put the framework together?
Oh, look, that was going on even before the sport plan was launched. I mean, that Sport Australia had started to do that for a few years, particularly in education. As most people would know, sporting schools, the federally funded program has been up and running since 2015. And there was a version of that, the Active After School Communities program, that ran for 10 years prior to that. Yeah. So that was already connecting sport with education. And that quote you just mentioned, you're absolutely spot on. And in the education setting, the mantra that we used was not to go into schools the way sport historically has done and offer their product and sort of shove it down the throat of teachers. It was more the reverse of, well, let's find out what educators need. What is it that teachers need in terms of support? And as a result, sport as a sector was able to heed the leadership of Sport Australia and start to align their products to the PE curriculum and start to think about teacher professional learning that provided actual accreditation hours for them and all of those sorts of things that, we now have become business as usual, and rightly so.
Yeah. Well done. Massive effort, and continues to, be a really important part of trying to get Australians, fit and healthy. And like you said, get those fundamental skills right in the beginning, to set them up for a long life, relationship with health and wellness. So we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to speed things on a little bit more. But where do you see yourself in the system? So obviously you've had a number of these roles, but in terms of yourself, your contribution and influence.
Look, I would like to remain connected to community sport. I think my bread and butter is community sport. I've worked at some NSOs and have been in that space a long time. But I think the physical literacy leadership role that I had, whilst it's no longer a formal role through Sport Australia, I see, a calling, if you like, for me, that regardless of what role I have within the sector, I still need to, and I want to champion that message and champion that cause. So, I'm connected with the Blue Earth Foundation, which is all about physical literacy and wellness generally. I'm doing some consultancy work where I can fit that in around physical literacy. I tutor, as you mentioned, which is just a bit of fun on the side. But for me, I really do want to still be the face and the champion and the voice as much as possible. And while I'm still credible, I suppose, to keep different organisations and different sectors on that path, on that trajectory to using physical literacy to underpin their efforts to get a country moving. I definitely want to play that role as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're doing it. So just continue what you're doing, I think. And my final question is around chronic conditions. So 1 in 2 Australians have got a chronic condition, and there's actually a huge correlation, isn't there, between chronic conditions and disability. Items such as arthritis or heart disease or mental health, these are considered disabilities. And I think globally, and I've got this stat from Special Olympics, is that people with intellectual disabilities are 2 times more likely to be obese. So in terms of us being able to nudge the system to improve well-being of Australians, is there one thing that you could put forward that would help? The $1 million question.
Talk about a final question. One thing.
Or anything that springs to mind. It's complex. Obviously, we can't solve it. So I'm not expecting you to give us the world answer. But
look, I'll give you perhaps a slightly different answer. But I would put it not to one tangible thing, but I would put it into an effort. And what I would say is, it will never be enough. We will never get to a point, I think, where we can say, right, we've done enough to get a country moving, or we've done enough to take care of the disability sector, or we've done enough to focus on any one particular group. I think it's an ongoing effort. And if there's one bit of advice I would give anyone that works in our space and that is driving this outcome, it would be to never give up, to keep putting the effort in, and to always find a way to go that extra yard, to find that extra dollar of investment to put towards this problem, to find that extra bit of time to develop an additional resource. But it is critical for the whole of population. I mean, I'm working in the disability sector now, but I'm still very much about whole of population. We need to get the whole country moving. We need to get the whole country healthy and happy, productive, socially connected, and we need to change the norm. We need that generational change to occur. So this is not something that we're going to be able to tick off in 5 years' time. This is something we'll still be doing in 20 or 30 years. And if we're doing it well, then we should see some of those results and rewards starting to come in a generation's time.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end, Pierre. So I just want to thank you for your time and your insights, in regards to disability and the physical literacy framework. And I'd like to wish you all the best with your new role, or it's not so new anymore, but and excited to see the work of the impact of the program in terms of the inclusive school sports program. And wishing you all the best for the rest of the year. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, look, I think just to thank you, David, for taking the opportunity to do this. I think it's great what you're doing with Collective Leisure in particular, and I know that you guys will be involved in what we're doing at Special Olympics in providing some programs, which is exciting. But I thank you for championing the cause as much as I try to do. I think the more of us are having these conversations and pointing out the key things that we need to keep doing, the advocacy is something that will hopefully continue that momentum and ensure that the impact and the results we're seeking will eventually come.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. Okay.
Thanks, mate.
I'll catch you soon. See you, Pierre.
Definitely. All the best. Thanks, David.